Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a relationship that President Biden described as rock solid and unwavering.
That's right, the U.S.-Israel alliance.
Following the Hamas attacks of October 7th, 2023, those words, they really echoed a history that stretches back, 75 years?
Right back to Israel's founding.
When the U.S. was the first nation to recognize the new state. Just 11 minutes after its declaration, apparently.
Yeah, that quick recognition, it kind of hints at the long, complex story we're about to get into.
It really does. And when you think about the sheer scale of support since then, what was the figure? $310 billion?
An incredible number, yeah. $310 billion in U.S. economic and military aid. That makes Israel the largest cumulative recipient of American foreign aid since World War II.
Wow. So it's clearly much more than just financial support.
Oh, absolutely. It's deeply embedded,
Yeah.
intelligence sharing, advanced weapons, significant diplomatic leverage within the U.S. system. It really makes you ask, how did this extraordinary level of support actually come about?
Okay, let's try and unpack that. We're drawing on the source you provided, the evolution of the U.S.-Israel relationship.
Right.
Our goal today is really to understand the forces that shaped this, unique alliance. How did the U.S. become the primary supporter, especially when Britain was initially involved, wasn't it?
That's a key question.
And what are the drivers behind this special relationship? Why does the U.S. seem to offer such, consistent backing, even when maybe it looks like it diverges from its own broader goals?
Yeah, and to what extent is that support truly unconditional? That's the other big question, isn't it? So to get a clearer picture, this deep dive will look at the key phases. We'll start, right after 48, the initial period, mostly moral sympathy, humanitarian concerns.
Yeah.
Then we'll track the shift towards the strategic partnership during the Cold War.
All right.
And finally, we'll analyze the complex sort of interdependent alliance we see today, shaped by things like domestic politics, evangelical Christian theology, lobbying.
That lobbying aspect is interesting, too.
Definitely. We'll touch on that argument that Israeli influence sometimes seems to, operate outside the usual diplomatic channels.
And just to be clear for everyone listening, we're mostly looking at the relationship before October 7th, 2023.
That's right. So to really get the U.S. role, we actually need to start a bit earlier. We need to talk about Great Britain first.
Exactly. The story really starts with Britain, doesn't it? Specifically, the 1917 Balfour Declaration. For those listening who might not recall, this was Britain basically saying publicly they supported the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people.
And interestingly, President Wilson, the U.S. president, he endorsed it too.
Which gives you an early hint of American sympathy for Zionist aims, even back then.
Precisely. Britain's role then got formalized with the British Mandate for Palestine, which ran from 1922 to 1948.
But it wasn't straightforward for Britain, was it?
Not at all. They were in a tough spot. They'd made sort of conflicting promises, really, to both the Zionists and to Arab leaders. So the Mandate period, which was supposed to guide the territory to independence, it just became more and more tense, especially as Jewish immigration increased, people fleeing Nazi persecution in the 30s.
Which led to more resistance from the Arab population.
Exactly. Culminating in the Arab Revolt between 1936 and 1939.
So by the mid-40s, Britain's position was just untenable.
Pretty much. By 1947, Britain was facing huge economic and political pressures after World War II. They decided to end the mandate and basically hand the problem over to the new United Nations.
Okay, the question of Palestine goes to the UN.
And that moment, that's the crucial turning point. That's where we start to see the beginnings of more direct U.S. involvement.
Which brings us right to President Truman. His support for the UN partition plan in 47, it wasn't a slam dunk inside his own government, was it? The State Department had reservations.
That's a key point.
Yeah.
Yeah, the State Department was really worried. They thought backing partition would alienate Arab nations.
And push them towards the Soviets.
Exactly. This is the dawn of the Cold War, remember. They wanted to keep good relations with the Arab world's strategically important oil resources,
But Truman went the other way. Why?
Well, it seems like a mix of things. His personal background, an evangelical Christian upbringing, deep humanitarian concern for Holocaust survivors, and crucially, domestic political calculations.
So a combination of personal conviction and politics pushed him to back the UN plan.
Right. And the U.S. didn't just sit back. They actively worked to get the votes for UN Resolution 181.
The partition resolution.
Yeah. They apparently put pressure on countries like Haiti, Thailand, Liberia, the Philippines. who were maybe on the fence.
So that shows a real early commitment, more than just words.
Definitely.
Then, May 1948, Israel declares independence, and the U.S. recognition, it was incredibly fast.
Astonishingly fast. May 14th, 1948, mandate ends. Israel declares independence, and just 11 minutes later, Truman extends de facto recognition.
De facto meaning they acknowledged it existed?
Yeah, acknowledging the state and its government exist, but without like a formal treaty yet. Still, it made the U.S. the very first nation to recognize Israel.
But importantly, that recognition didn't mean immediate military backing.
Exactly right. During the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which broke out immediately, the U.S. actually kept an arms embargo on everyone involved.
Why was that?
They were trying to prevent a wider war, maintain some kind of regional balance, and partly, again, they were worried about the Soviets gaining influence. So the early U.S. approach, it was quite cautious. Balancing acts.
And that caution seems to have carried on into the early Cold War period.
It did, yeah. For the first decade or so after 48, the U.S. kept trying to, keep lines open with both Israel and its Arab neighbors, all while trying to block Soviet influence.
Like during the Suez Crisis in '56, Eisenhower was pretty firm with Israel then.
Very firm. That's a perfect example. He actually started to cut off all U.S. aid to Israel, even talked about pushing for UN expulsion to force them to withdraw from Egyptian territory.
That really shows the kind of leverage the U.S. had back then. It feels quite different from later on.
It does, and it's also worth remembering, in those early years, it wasn't the U.S. who was Israel's main military backer. It was France.
France. Okay, why them?
Well, France became Israel's primary military supplier, gave them advanced weapons, even helped with nuclear technology, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah. That close relationship lasted until just before the 1967 Six-Day War. Then President de Gaulle, thinking the Arabs might win with Soviet help, he suddenly imposed an arms embargo on Israel.
Which opened the door for the U.S.
Exactly. That French shift created a vacuum, an opportunity for the U.S. to step in much more decisively.
And it sounds like President Kennedy was the one who really started that shift in the U.S. approach.
That seems right. Under Kennedy, we see the beginnings of what gets called this special relationship. In '62, he actually told Golda Meir, the Israeli PM, that the U.S. had a special bond with Israel, comparable only to Britain. And he took a big step by breaking the old arms embargo, selling Israel Hawk anti-aircraft missiles. That signaled a real change.
Then comes 1967, the Six-Day War. That seems like a massive turning point in the relationship.
Absolutely huge. Israel's incredibly fast victory over Soviet-backed Arab states. It just completely changed how the U.S. saw things.
It showed Israel's military strength.
Exactly. It really boosted Israel's strategic value in American eyes. President Johnson, LBJ, he started seeing Israel as this key strategic asset. He began providing more advanced defensive weapons.
And this is when U.S. support for the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza begins.
Essentially, yes. That period marks the start of that. The '67 war also really solidified pro-Israel feelings in Washington and among American Jews.
And Israel's image as a strategic asset just kept growing after that.
It did. Look at the Jordan crisis in September 1970. Syria threatened to intervene in Jordan.
Right.
The U.S. quietly asked Israel to get ready to step in for Jordan. Israel's willingness, their capability, it deterred the Syrians and helped save the Jordanian monarchy.
So another example of Israel acting as a reliable partner for the U.S.
Precisely. It really cemented that image.
And then the 1973 Yom Kippur War seems to have locked in that strategic alliance even further.
Totally. Israel took some big hits initially. It was a surprise attack. But the massive, rapid U.S. airlift of weapons and supplies that was absolutely vital for Israel's counterattack and eventual victory.
Nixon went all in.
Nixon's administration provided unprecedented aid, military and economic. They fully bought into Israel's view that the Soviets were the main problem in the region and backed Israel's right to defend itself.
So that intense period really set the stage for the relationship becoming more formalized, more institutionalized, especially under Reagan in the 80s.
Yeah, what's interesting about the Reagan years is how they actively worked to make the alliance more formal, deeper. Secretary of State Haig, he pushed this idea of a strategic consensus against the Soviets in the Middle East.
And Israel was keen.
Israel was very receptive, much more so than many Arab states who were still focused primarily on the Palestinian issue, on Zionism.
So formal agreements followed.
Yep. The 1981 Memorandum of Understanding on Strategic Cooperation. That was basically formal recognition of Israel as a key strategic ally.
And that wasn't just paper. It led to real benefits for Israel.
Oh, yeah. In 1987, Congress designated Israel a major non-NATO ally.
What did that mean in practice?
It meant Israeli companies could compete for U.S. defense contracts more easily, almost like NATO countries. Plus, you got the first U.S.-Israel free trade agreement around then. And the Reagan administration also shifted its language on Israeli settlements, refusing to call them illegal.
So by the time the Cold War ended, the original reason for the strategic partnership, the Soviet threat, was gone. But the relationship was deeply embedded.
That's the key takeaway. The Soviet Union collapses, but the U.S.-Israel bond doesn't weaken. It actually keeps deepening military, intelligence, tech, diplomatic ties.
Which tells you there must have been other strong forces at play, beyond just Cold War strategy.
Exactly. Which brings us to one of those other powerful factors, the influence of evangelical Christianity in the U.S.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating angle. Our source really emphasizes this, how evangelical Christians are a huge, often very vocal base of support for Israel.
It's a crucial element. They're the largest religious group in the U.S., and often their commitment to Israel seems even stronger, or perhaps more unwavering than that of many American Jews.
What's the basis for that? Is it theological?
Primarily, yes. It stems from a theological framework called dispensationalism, which is common among many evangelicals. It involves a very literal reading of Bible prophecies about the Jewish people and the land of Israel.
Okay.
A core belief is that God's promises to Abraham are eternal, still unfolding. Yeah. So supporting Israel is seen as aligning with God's plan, bringing blessings. Opposing Israel is seen as opposing God's will.
And that Pew Forum study you mentioned found, 82% of white evangelicals believe God gave Israel to the Jewish people?
An astonishing number, right? 82%, more than double the percentage of American Jews who said the same in that study. It really shows how deep this belief runs.
So for a large group of Americans, supporting Israel isn't just politics, it's faith.
Exactly. And that theological commitment often translates into very firm, unwavering support that isn't easily swayed by political arguments or, debates about specific Israeli policies.
Like the occupation, for instance.
Right. As one analyst put it, from this viewpoint, if God gave the entire land to the Jewish people, then discussions about the details of the occupation become almost secondary to that core belief.
And this deep belief has real political weight in the U.S.
Oh, absolutely. In terms of sheer numbers and electoral impact, evangelical Christians arguably wield more political influence on this issue than American Jews. They're a huge voting bloc, and a significant chunk consistently says the U.S. isn't supportive enough of Israel. Their concentration in key states, their reliable Republican voting patterns, it gives them outsized influence, especially in presidential politics.
And we've seen presidents connect their faith to their Israel policy.
We have. Both Reagan and George W. Bush explicitly mentioned their Christian faith as a factor in their support for Israel. Yeah. Reagan, even before he was president, wrote about Israel's vital role in blocking Soviet plans, linking it to biblical prophecy in ways that resonated with evangelicals.
And it's not just individual voters. There are powerful organizations mobilizing this support.
Right. Christians United for Israel, CUFI, founded by Pastor John Hagee, they claim over 10 million members.
10 million? That's huge.
It's massive. Bigger than AIPAC, bigger than the entire U.S. adult Jewish population. CUFI is a major lobbying force, holds big summits in D.C., gets grassroots pressure going.
Are there other ways this connection is built?
Yeah, another thing is the tours. Many evangelical megachurch pastors lead trips to Israel.
Ah, the Holy Land tours.
Exactly, often partly subsidized by Israeli tourism folks. These trips create really strong emotional, personal bonds. They build long-term relationships, give people a sense of Israel's security challenges from a particular viewpoint.
But the source also mentions some newer polling suggests maybe the support isn't quite as solid among younger evangelicals.
That's a really interesting potential shift, yeah. Some recent data does show a dip in that rock-solid support among younger evangelicals. University of Maryland research found a pretty big drop between 2015 and 2018.
And more sympathy for Palestinians.
A bit more, yes. And fewer young evangelicals saying their religious beliefs are the main reason they support Israel. So maybe a generational change is underway there, something to watch.
Okay, so moving beyond the religious dimension, let's tackle that other core question. Why has the U.S. generally favored Israel over various Arab states? It can't just be evangelical influence.
No, definitely not. It's also rooted in shifting strategic calculations over time. During the Cold War, it was pretty clear-cut for U.S. strategists.
Israel versus Soviet allies.
Right. Israel was strongly anti-Soviet, while several key Arab nationalist states were aligned with Moscow. Israel's military victories, especially after '67, against Soviet armed forces really underscored its value.
And Israel provided intelligence on Soviet gear.
Exactly. They captured Soviet equipment, shared insights with the U.S., which was apparently quite useful, especially during the Vietnam War.
So in the Cold War, Israel was seen as a key asset against the Soviets.
The crucial one.
Yeah.
And beyond just fighting Soviet allies, Israel sometimes acted as a sort of proxy for U.S. interests when direct American action was too tricky.
You mentioned the Jordan intervention in 1970.
That, plus Israel bombing Iraq's Osirak reactor in '81 and destroying Syria's secret nuclear site in 2007, actions that aligned with U.S. goals, even if not explicitly requested sometimes.
And then there's the whole shared values argument, the democracy angle.
That's been a constant theme, hasn't it? The only democracy in the Middle East. It creates this powerful cultural, ideological connection that resonates with Americans, both the public and the political elite.
Does that shared framework make cooperation easier?
Absolutely. Shared ideas about legal systems, governance, rights. It builds trust. That trust is essential for the really deep intelligence sharing, military cooperation, technology transfer that you see, maybe more so than with some authoritarian Arab partners.
And these strategic benefits, they didn't just vanish when the Cold War ended.
Not at all. The intelligence cooperation is still huge. Israel provides vital intel on Middle East developments, terrorism, proliferation. Some reports say the U.S. relies on Israel for a large chunk of its high-tech intelligence gathering in the region.
And the military tech collaboration continues.
Big time. Joint programs like Arrow, Iron Dome missile defense. Plus, Israel's experience with things like counterterrorism and asymmetric warfare offers valuable lessons for the U.S. military.
And the economies are increasingly linked, too.
Definitely. Since that 1985 free trade agreement, things have really taken off. Lots of Israeli tech companies listed on NASDAQ, hundreds of U.S. R&D centers in Israel, massive growth in trade, significant Israeli investment in the U.S. It weaves the economies together.
So if you compare U.S. aid to Israel with aid to, say, Egypt or Jordan, it's structured differently. It serves different purposes.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Aid to Egypt and Jordan, while substantial, is often aimed more at maintaining stability, keeping the peace treaties with Israel intact. Aid to Israel is heavily focused on maintaining its military superiority, that qualitative military edge, or QME, through advanced weapons and tech development. The type of cooperation is different too, more internal security focus with some Arab partners versus regional deterrence and high-end military tech with Israel. It reflects different capabilities, but also different levels of trust.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to something that always sparks debate. The Israel lobby. How influential is it, really, in shaping U.S. policy?
It's definitely a significant factor.
Yeah.
And yeah, often controversial. We need to look at the main players, their methods, and the power dynamics.
AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, that's the name most people know.
Right. AIPAC is probably the most visible. Their main job is lobbying Congress on behalf of Israel, pushing for aid packages, favorable legislation, and they've been very effective at it.
They have a large membership.
They claim a large membership, yes, and a vast network of donors. They also run educational programs, like those trips to Israel for politicians and staff.
Which critics sometimes call propaganda trips.
That's the criticism, yeah. They're designed to present a very specific pro-Israel narrative.
And AIPAC isn't the only player here, right? You mentioned the Christian Zionist groups earlier.
Exactly. Groups like CUFI bring that huge grassroots base, the numbers. It creates this powerful combination, Jewish community resources and evangelical political mobilization. Plus, you have think tanks, other advocacy groups, all working generally in the same direction.
So how do they actually exert influence? What are the mechanics?
Well, historically, AIPAC didn't directly give campaign money itself to keep its tax status. Instead, it worked through networks of PACs and donors who followed its lead.
Kind of coordinating contributions.
Effectively, yes. Very effective coordination. Though recently, I think in 2021, they actually formed their own PAC and super PAC, adapting to the changing campaign finance landscape.
What else? Grassroots pressure.
Huge. Mobilizing members to call Congress, write letters, media influence, academic partnerships, funding think tanks that produce favorable research. And those congressional trips are a big part of it, building personal relationships, giving lawmakers direct exposure to Israeli perspectives.
The Mearsheimer and Walt book, The Israel Lobby, really brought this into the open back in 2007. What was their main argument?
Their core argument, and it was controversial, was that the Israel lobby is the primary reason for the deep U.S. commitment to Israel, more so than pure strategic interest or shared values.
And they argued this sometimes harms U.S. interests.
Yes, they argued it stifles open debate, and limits U.S. diplomatic options, particularly regarding the Palestinians, ultimately harming both U.S. and even Israeli interests.
That caused a massive backlash, didn't it?
Oh, huge. Accusations of anti-Semitism, flawed analysis, but it also got support from others who felt it raised important, often unasked questions about foreign policy influence. It really exposed the sensitivity around ethnic lobbying and the balance between domestic politics and national interest.
Which leads to that phrase you sometimes hear, the tail wagging the dog. Does Israel have disproportionate influence over the U.S.?
It's a persistent question. There's evidence people point to. The U.S. veto record at the UN Security Council, for example, blocking resolutions critical of Israel far more than on any other issue.
42 vetoes, I think the source said. Over half of all U.S. vetoes ever.
Something like that, yeah. Then there's continued U.S. support despite official opposition to settlements, the close diplomatic coordination, the way U.S. politicians often compete to show their pro-Israel credentials, especially at AIPAC conferences. These things suggest significant influence.
But we also talked about times the U.S. did push back successfully.
Absolutely. That's the other side of the coin. Eisenhower in '56, George H.W. Bush with the loan guarantees in '91. The U.S. still holds powerful cards. The massive aid, diplomatic cover, access to technology and markets. Israel relies on that.
So maybe it's not one controlling the other?
Probably not. It looks more like what some call complex interdependence, mutual influence, but maybe asymmetrical.
No.
Well, perhaps Israeli influence is stronger in Congress and public opinion, while U.S. leverage is greater within the executive branch, especially in a crisis. Plus, you have all the non-governmental ties, business, academia, personal connections creating multiple channels. The integration of Israeli tech into the U.S. market also creates its own constituency for close ties.
So the balance might shift over time.
It seems to have. Some former officials have said it's harder now for the U.S. to credibly threaten things like aid cuts because Congress is likely to push back so strongly. The Israeli side seems to have gotten better at navigating the U.S. system.
Okay, so this whole dynamic feeds into that core debate. Is Israel, on balance, a strategic asset or a strategic liability for the U.S.?
And there's no easy answer. People strongly disagree.
What's the case for it being an asset?
Proponents, like Blackwell and Slocum cited in the source, they highlight tangible contributions. Counterproliferation hitting those nuclear sites in Iraq and Syria, military tech innovation drones, missile defense, armor, counterterrorism cooperation, vital intelligence sharing.
Economic benefits, too.
Cybersecurity, tech partnerships, Bill Gates praising Israeli innovation, plus the argument that Israel acts as a regional deterrent, stabilizing things in a way that benefits the U.S.
Okay, what about the liability side of the argument?
Critics start with the cost. That $310 billion in aid plus opportunity costs, what else could that money do than diplomatic complications?
Alienating Arab and Muslim populations.
Right. Limiting U.S. influence, damaging its image. The 1973 oil embargo is often cited as a consequence. Some link anti-American terrorism, like Al-Qaeda's justifications, directly to U.S. support for Israel.
Strategic constraints.
Yeah, the argument that the relationship limits U.S. diplomatic options makes it harder to be seen as an honest broker in the Palestinian conflict. Critics also point out Israel didn't offer much direct help in U.S. wars in Iraq or Afghanistan, and even needed U.S. protection from Iraqi missiles in '91. They argue the threats have changed, maybe reducing Israel's strategic utility while the costs remain high.
So it really comes down to how you weigh the costs and benefits and what you see as the main U.S. interests.
Exactly. Supporters value the intangible benefits of alliance, the intelligence, the shared values. Critics focus on the measurable costs, the diplomatic blowback, the constraints. It really highlights the need for clear U.S. objectives and maybe more rigorous analysis, though getting agreement on that analysis is tough.
And the way the relationship is structured institutionally makes it very hard to change course quickly.
Extremely hard. The aid structure itself, foreign military financing, specific funds for missile defense like Iron Dome, David's Sling, Arrow, those are embedded in law in multi-year agreements.
And unique perks like lump sum payments.
Historically, yes, though that's being phased out. Plus, the commitment to Israel's qualitative military edge, the QME, that shapes all U.S. arms sales in the region.
And the military cooperation goes beyond just money and weapons.
Oh, yeah. Joint exercises, tech sharing, integrated planning through bodies like the Joint Political Military Group since '83, constant intelligence sharing. Joint development, like the Arrow system.
Yeah.
Even pre-positioned U.S. military gear stored in Israel.
Economically, too, very intertwined.
Definitely. That free trade agreement led to a huge jump in trade. Joint R&D funds like BIRD, all those U.S. tech R&D centers in Israel, Israeli companies on NASDAQ.
And finally, the diplomatic umbrella.
Crucial. Those 42 UN vetoes. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Recognizing sovereignty over the Golan Heights. These aren't small things. The whole system is deeply institutionalized, making it very resistant to sudden shifts.
But even with all that institutional depth, there were signs of tension emerging before October 2023, cracks appearing.
There were, yeah, suggesting potential long-term shifts, maybe. Generational changes in the U.S. are a big one.
Younger Americans less supportive.
Polling shows that consistently, especially among Democrats. The 2024 Chicago Council survey found only 32% of younger Americans felt Israel's military actions were justified, much lower than older groups.
And we already mentioned declining support among younger evangelicals, too.
Right. That threatens the traditional bipartisan consensus. You see more criticism of Israeli policies within the Democratic Party now, debates about conditioning aid.
The Palestinian issue remains a constant friction point.
Always. U.S. talks two-state solution, opposes settlements, while Israeli policies often go the other way. For younger, more progressive Americans, the Palestinian issue is increasingly central to how they view the relationship. You even hear rights groups using terms like apartheid.
And there was that big public clash over the Iran nuclear deal under Obama.
Unprecedented, really. Netanyahu addressing Congress to oppose the deal. It showed real divergence on a major strategic issue. Trump pulling out later aligned with Israel's view, but complicated things with European allies.
And the partisanship gap in the U.S. keeps widening.
Significantly. Republicans becoming more supportive, Democrats more critical or static. Progressive Democrats are really challenging the old assumptions. The 2021 Gaza conflict really highlighted those splits, put pressure on Biden.
And AIPAC forming its own PAPAC reflects that polarization.
Seems like it, yeah. They realized they needed to operate differently in this more partisan environment. Plus, you have tensions even within the pro-Israel camp. Evangelicals prioritizing unconditional support, many Jewish Americans more critical, focus on the two-state solution. It's getting more complex.
So, wrapping this up, how do we assess this whole evolution? From that initial sympathy to this incredibly deep, sometimes seemingly unconditional alliance?
It's a remarkable journey. The key drivers seem clear. The Cold War strategic shift was vital initially. Then the enduring power of evangelical Christian theology, that 82% belief figure, is striking. Add sophisticated lobbying that really embedded pro-Israel views in the U.S. system, and layer on top the genuine strategic and intelligence cooperation that does benefit the U.S., it's a potent mix.
And the power balance. Who's really influencing whom?
It's still hard to give a simple answer. The U.S. can exert pressure. Historically it has, but it seems less willing or able to do so now. It looks like asymmetric interdependence, maybe leaning more towards Israeli influence in domestic U.S. politics, while the U.S. retains leverage in crisis moments and through the sheer scale of its support. But ultimately, Israel knows it needs that U.S. backing.
Looking ahead then, challenges seem likely.
Potential challenges, yes. Those generational shifts in opinion, the growing progressive wing in the Democratic Party. But the institutional momentum, the lobby's influence, those create huge resistance to change. So expect gradual evolution probably, rather than sudden breaks.
What are the broader takeaways from this whole story?
Well, it shows how smaller states can influence larger allies, especially through domestic politics and cultural connections. It highlights the tension between lobbying and democratic accountability in foreign policy. And it really demonstrates how history, identity, moral commitments can shape relationships just as much, maybe even more, than cold strategic logic.
It's incredibly multifaceted, strategic, political, historical, cultural, religious. That explains its durability and why it sparks such passionate debate.
Exactly. The future likely depends on how regional dynamics shift, how U.S. domestic politics evolve, and whether those generational changes continue to gain momentum.
So as we conclude this deep dive into the U.S.-Israel relationship, we've really seen its complex evolution driven by strategy, faith, politics, and real cooperation.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Given those shifting demographics and the changing political winds in the U.S. we've discussed, what are the biggest long-term challenges this special relationship might actually face? And, maybe more importantly, how might both countries need to adapt if those challenges really start to bite?
Definitely something to think about. We hope you'll explore the source material further and consider all the different angles on this complex and enduring alliance. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.